So you should have completed the what are the characteristics of a human-centered design approach question on Canvas. Remember, we will not be grading this. It's for participation credit only. We will be doing this routinely throughout the quarter. The purpose of these learning checks are to help us assess the pace of the course and our delivery of the content. So sometimes they will be quizzes like this on Canvas. Sometimes they will be 1-minute responses to questions in class. If we do this in class and you are not there, you will not get your participation credit. Something to keep in mind. So some of the questions or some of the answers that students have had to this question in the past include universal usability. One statistics that's quoted kind of like a mantra in the UX field is that 90% of people should be able to use your software. Whether or not that's realistic, we don't know, but it's a good goal to have. The user experience is the center of the design process. That is another characteristic of the human-centered design approach. So that means that basically it's equal to software or algorithmic correctness, for example. Getting consistent feedback is another characteristic. So having the users involved throughout their process from early design stages or formative research to the final analyses at the end of a development iteration. And that brings me to the next point, that the user experience design process is iterative. It is a cyclical process. If you have the opportunity to work on one of these projects in the real world, it should, and you should have it be a cyclical process. However, this is difficult to do in a 10-week course, so we will largely be engaging in the human-centered design approach linearly.
So, I went through and basically did a Google image search for what is user experience. And I found all kinds of diagrams. And I just kind of want to go through some of them right now. There's a lot of differences, some similarities. What I want you to do as we go through this is to think about where are you seeing things that are different that may show up in only one or two of these? Where are you seeing things that are common across all of them? This one, user experience, is about users. It's got a nice 6E. Everything here starts with an E. Ease of use, easy to learn, efficiency, effectiveness, error-free, and engaging, with, of course, people at the center. So you get a sense here, a lot of times when we talk about usability, we're over here in this side here with the ease of use, easy to learn, and efficiency, sometimes error-free. When we get into user experience, we start adding in the engaging and the effectiveness as real core pieces of that as well. Here's another one. User experience is about making things desirable, accessible, credible, valuable, findable, and usable. So again, a little bit different thing here. Usable is up there, and not so much of an emphasis here on efficiency. And different shapes. UX, visual design, over here on the left. User needs, content, navigation design, information architecture. What's different about this? What don't you see in this one? Yeah.
The user design in the center.
Right, so it's got, it doesn't have the user necessarily in the center, but what else does it have? There's a word that's missing that was in each of the others. Usable, right, usability. This actually takes it a little bit different, goes on a different kind. Has some of these same things, but is focused more here, not so much on what your goals are, but instead what kinds of activities a UX designer has to deal with, or a UX professional. So thinking of putting together visual design, user needs, content, information architecture, and navigation design. Again, information architecture, does anyone remember what that one is? What do we mean by information architecture? Yeah.
Was like how information was laid out on a screen based on how users would, I guess, like interpret or like where they go look at stuff first.
Right. So it's really understanding the structure of the information. That's the big thing. In architecture, thinking about that word, architecture is about the structure of buildings. Information architecture is about the structure of information. How are you going to actually show which information is more or less important? How are you actually going to arrange it? There's a technique, I don't know if anyone remembers, where that we used for figuring out what kinds of words people would want in menus or what things people would be familiar with. Does anyone remember what that technique is? Yeah?
Is it card sorting?
Good, card sorting. It's that idea, write the words you're thinking about on cards and ask people to put them into groups. Gives you a good sense of how people naturally think about what the categories are. That's a big part of information architecture. Not the only part, but it's part of it. Here's a new user experience framework. And here, we've got multiple levels. Again, UX right at the center. We've got this nice Venn diagram of task and context and system. So it's putting those three things together. It's kind of a nice idea, remembering that this is about doing things with the software. What is the task? What is the context of use? And then the technology becomes equal to those as part of that. It's the system. And then thinking about what do you do, or what do you think about? User expectations, that's something we haven't seen before in these. Communication, how do you communicate with your users? Let them know what it is that they should expect and how do you understand what their expectations are. Thinking about competition, we'll actually talk about that more this quarter than we did last quarter. The interaction piece of it, the visual language. And then of course there's this nice strategy and tactics, which I have no idea what that means. But it makes some nice circles. The field of user, this one's got even more complicated. UX in the middle, again, communication showing up here again. Some understanding, definition. And what this one is this is actually looking a little bit differently. This is more the fields that are actually involved in user experience writ large. So it could be something like information architecture that we've talked about. It could be usability engineering over here. But overall, we've got quite a variety of different kinds of job titles or roles that can be involved in this. Industrial design is an interesting one. Technical communication. Technical communication is a field that really thinks about stuff like how do you write a user manual? Or how do you communicate with your users what they're supposed to do? So all of those pieces show up as part of UX. We had 6 E's before, now we've got 6 D's. UX is a 6D process that starts with discover and then define and design and develop and deploy and drive. So these are quite small, so I'll read out a few of these. So up here under discover, it's things like user research, doing focus groups or interviews or surveys, requirements gathering. Defining is here about storyboarding and brainstorming and defining your requirements and user experience. And then design, you get prototyping activities, wireframing, mock-ups here. Developing, actually creating the software. Deploying it, thinking about things like standards and accessibility testing and user training. How do you go through that? And then what they call drive, which is really about maintenance and support. And thinking about how do you support that software through its life cycle. So here they've got a nice 6D process. Another one here. This has interaction design, information architecture. Again, this one focuses a little bit more on sort of the different aspects rather than activities, or rather than sort of sub-pieces. It's like kind of the different concerns. Interaction design, user interface. Typography, one that we haven't seen before, but is an important part of layout. And then something similar, content strategy, information architecture, user interface, platform functionality, usability, accessibility. And basically the same thing, now with a hipster beard. Oh, this is a good one. Venn diagrams are always nice. This one puts content at the middle with information design, interaction design, and sensorial design. Nice fancy word for something. Emotions, for that kind of stuff. Another Venn diagram. Prototyping, business analysis, and visual design. That is their typo analysis. But here, the overlap of visual design and prototyping, you see the interface. Here, the business and the prototype, you think about performance. At the visual design in the business, you think about interaction. Surrounded by information design, business plans, and market communication. Bringing a little bit more of the business angle into this, thinking about how is this going to perform in a market. And the super Venn diagram. I'm not going to go through all of this. I will post the slides. If you want, you can go but do this. But again, as the big pieces, prototyping, business analytics, and visual design development, basically the same as this one. But now all of these overlaps, kind of really trying to spell out and things like consistency and release candidate, and simplicity, and other nice words. All right, so what do you see? What stands out to you? Yeah.
All interconnected.
Good, lots of interconnected stuff here, lots of overlap. I mean, I think it's something, and my guess is especially, how many of you are informatics majors? Okay, how many of you, is anyone not in ICS? A couple, few, okay. So one of the things, for those of you who are in ICS, and especially in informatics and related majors out of that department, my guess is you'll already have this feel that it's pretty interdisciplinary, that there's a lot of overlaps in the kind of work we do. And that's true of user experience as well. Just as a general thing, it pulls in from everywhere. It's kind of an amalgamation. 20 years ago when I did some work at Microsoft, there was the usability group. And that was a completely separate group from the design group. And the software design group was actually a completely separate group from the graphic design group. And that was a completely separate group from the marketing group. And all of these had their own kind of vertical structures, a nice matrix organization. So everybody was on a project, but what they would do when they did a project is kind of pick, but you had your own area of responsibility. And so as a youth, it was weird. I remember one of the things that we did on a project was actually went out and said, hey, we want to do some perspective stuff to drive design, not just evaluating at the end. And it was one of the first times that anybody had ever done that within that company. And think about user experience up front rather than kind of at the end. Today, that's completely flipped. That user experience piece is really interwoven, and sort of everybody takes responsibility for user experience. What other things do you notice?
User experience is kind of an umbrella term.
Okay, good.
Of other things.
Yeah, it's also an umbrella term. You can almost dump anything into user experience, and when you see, the jobs that are out there, some are, user experience could essentially be, and you'll see this, I think, maybe you notice, a few of these have more marketing and business than others. And there are areas, and certain companies do that integration really well. But other companies, I think, kind of treat user experience as doesn't have enough cup holders without really thinking much about sort of what are the deeper tasks or how do people really want to use this system. And so you get a little bit more kind of what will sell rather than what is actually a good experience. It's one of the things and one of the places where there can still be tension in this, because a lot of times user experience, we talked about this in 131, is sort of that return on investment from user experience work. And a lot of times those tend to be slower. They tend to be a little bit farther out. So it's even more important to think about how are you going to make the business case for the kind of work that you do with user experience. Anything else you noticed in these? Yeah.
Go back to the setup from either UX design perspective or the user itself.
we talking about the user or the design? What is at the center? What do we put at the center of these? I like that there were 3 of these that had people at the middle. It was kind of interesting. One of them was the generic man. One was one was the men's room. One was the all gender restroom, and then the other one was the hipster. But I think part of that idea of, do we put the UX at the middle, or the system at the middle, or the people at the middle? How do we think about what is that in there? Anything else? I noticed a few things. They've all got bright colors, Venn diagrams, pie charts, people icons, and lots of alliteration. Anytime you're making diagrams, it's nice to have some of those things capturing attention. I think some of these are more successful than others. Sometimes you get things like, which one? This one. It's just like, oh man, way too complicated. And thinking about how do we communicate our ideas, that's actually part of user experience as well. We're going to be writing reports in this class. We're going to be creating documents for other people to read. And one of the things I want you to do as we do that throughout this quarter is to have that idea that part of what you are doing is also trying to make a document that is easy to read and follows those same kind of user experience principles. How do you actually think about the person who's going to be reading your document and make sure that it's something that will actually meet their needs, that communicates that information well? All right, let's move on a little bit. Oh yeah, for those of you who did have me, you've heard this before. But one of the things about this, and I kind of talked about this, is that user experience is this hybrid term. It is a more recent term. It may not be a term that ends up disappearing after a while. I don't know how long it will be around, but the field of human-computer interaction really started out where the professional side of HCI used to be usability. And that was all we talked about. And our questions were things like, are people able to successfully do the tasks that we think they should be able to do with this? That was actually a pretty high bar in the early days. It was not, you pick up an iPhone now, it's pretty easy to use. But that's because it's had 20 years of development, 20 plus years of doing it wrong in order to get it right. And so those questions about usability and about efficiency really were driving HCI as a domain early on. And then we get into the user experience, and we really start thinking about usability, the HCI professionals wanting to get more involved in more parts of the project. Like when I talked about being at Microsoft and saying, hey, let's do this at the beginning, not just the end. And it's thinking about how to do that. Also thinking about that experience being driven not just by that moment of use, but sort of throughout the life cycle of when somebody is actually working with that system.
Once upon a time, a very long time ago, I was at Apple. And we said the experience of using these computers is weak. The experience, when you first discover it, when you see it in the store, when you buy it, when you, can't fit it into the car. It's in this great big box. It doesn't fit into the car. And when you finally do get it home, opening the box up and, it looks scary. I don't know if I dare put this computer together. All of that is user experience. It's everything that touches upon your experience with the product, and it may not even be near the product. It may be when you're telling somebody else about it. That's what we meant when we devised the term user experience and set up what we called the User Experience Architect's Office at Apple to try to enhance things. Now, Apple was already pretty good, so we were starting with a good product, making it even better. Today, that term has been horribly misused. It's used by people to say, I'm a user experience designer. I design websites or I design apps. And they have no clues to what they're doing. And they think the experience is that simple device, the website or the app or who knows what. No, it's everything. It's the way you experience the world. It's the way you experience your life. It's the way you experience the service. Or, an app or a computer system. But it's a system, it's everything. Got it?
So that was Don Norman. Does anybody recognize that name? You remember? So Don Norman has written a couple of books that At least we have some readings in 131. One of them that's really popular is called The Design of Everyday Things. And then he also wrote the book called Emotional Design. He's written several others. He's one of the most famous HCI professionals. He actually is, I think, considered to be one of the founders of the field of HCI. He actually started out in cognitive science at UC San Diego, and then in the mid-90s left UCSD and went to work for Apple, and really started thinking about how do you do that kind of work. He also started with Jacob Nielsen, another kind of founder in the field, this group, Nielsen-Norman Group, which was a consulting group that was done a lot. You'll notice that we're going to be doing a lot of readings. They have a great website with a lot of resources, so we'll be pointing to that throughout the quarter as well. But you know, he's really kind of one of the, and in particular of this word user experience. Hearing how he talks about it, he asks questions. When he started out, they were looking at things like, what is it like when you get a computer out of a box? And you know, before he started at Apple, and when they started, you'd open the box, and there would be all of these pieces, and you would pull out this really thick manual that was really difficult to understand, hard to put together. And one of the things that they actually created at Apple as a huge leap forward just in this, and this came about because they were thinking about what is the user experience, not just how do we design the computer itself, but how do we actually design the whole experience, is that they created that sheet that when you open it up now, the first thing you see is something that says start here. And it's got simple instructions on how to essentially plug it in and get it turned on, and very graphic and pictorial. And they did that by using some of these same kind of evaluation techniques that we're going to use for evaluating software. They watched people opening boxes and figured out, okay, what is it they do? How do they actually have that experience? And that idea of the first use experience was one that he came up with, and his group at Apple really started thinking about. Today, he's also doing a lot of work in the area of automotive stuff. He's, I know recently I heard him talk about, he's interested in questions like, how does a car communicate with a pedestrian? You know, you've got that complicated thing that when you're driving along and you get to an intersection, and it's maybe a stop sign or a yield or something, and there's somebody about to walk across. How do you decide if they're actually ready to walk across? Do you stop for them, not? Who waves who on? What happens if it's, and I don't know if anybody else has had this happen, if it's a couple there, and one of them starts walking while the other one starts saying, no, no, go ahead. And then it's like, okay, which one do you actually pay attention to? And that question of how is a car going to communicate with a pedestrian who is maybe not the intended user, but still has to have that interaction and that experience of that software. So he's done a lot of work. He's actually back at UC San Diego now as the head of their design lab that's there, and is occasionally coming up because to UCI because he's also part of Cal IT2, which has a branch here at Irvine. So again, user experience includes more than just the app or the interface, and more than just evaluation. It's thinking about design, about sort of the entire process. And it also includes more than we can actually cover in 10 weeks. So we're going to get a lot deeper than we got in 131. We're going to get a lot more hands-on. But it is still going to be a little bit, not everything. This isn't going to turn you into an expert, but this class hopefully will get you to the point that you can at least credibly apply for an entry-level job. So, thinking about that, any questions before we go on? Any thoughts? All right, so what I want to talk about next are what are my learning goals for you, essentially, for this quarter. What do I hope you are going to get out of this class? And we'll talk about how these relate to different things throughout. But the first goal that we have here is really understanding the importance of user-centered design and evaluation and its place in a system development lifecycle. So you've heard, especially if you took the 131 from me, you've heard me say this over and over again. a big part of this is advocating for this user-centered perspective within the companies that you might end up working at, within development cycles, thinking about how do you actually incorporate this and understanding why it's important. What is that return on the investment for it? And thinking about sort of what do you get out of this that maybe you don't get out of traditional requirements analysis or out of other kind of traditional development methodologies. Second goal. I want you to learn a variety of methods for user research and UX evaluation and be able to select appropriate methods for a given project or context. Again, for those of you who took 131 from me, this should not be a surprise. This is something that I push, that part of what we're doing is building a toolbox here, and you need to know when you're going to pull out a hammer and when you're going to pull out a saw, and hopefully not get those mixed up because you can have problems. And so really we're going to be talking about a lot of methods. Some of them are things that we've seen before, some of them are new. In all cases, we're going to go more in depth than we did and get more hands-on use than we got in 131. Third goal, learn to conduct user research and UX evaluation of interfaces of low and medium complexity. This is sort of entry-level UX work. This is not going to qualify you or give you the tools necessary to really go after really complex and hard UX problems. We aren't going to be on the cutting edge of research and design here. We're going to be focusing mostly on the practical kind of stuff that you're going to run into in common spaces. We're going to talk about the other stuff, but most of our hands-on work especially is going to focus on these kind of low and medium complexity areas and thinking really about the most common kinds of scenarios that you're likely to run into. Goal 4, the little difference here between goal 3 is really 2 and 3 we're talking about evaluation and user research. Here we're talking about design. So we are actually also going to talk a bit more about design in this class than we did in 131. We touched on that a little bit, but this class actually we think a lot more about those processes of sketching and prototyping, mocking things up, about how to connect what we know about our researchers and our evaluation work into sort of then how do we actually create those fixes. Goal 5. I mentioned this already, but it's really learning to write like a UX professional. Learning how do you present this work? How do you create a report about it? How do you talk about it? What kind of language do you use? But also kind of what kind of structures in reports are going to help you communicate this well in a business environment. Goal 6, develop collaborative skills, including organizing workflows and tasks, communicating successfully, providing constructive critique, and honestly evaluating the work of others. One of the things that you will learn about me, if you don't know this already, I believe that the ability to collaborate is a skill. It's not something you were born with, and it's not something that you, if you don't feel like you have it now, it doesn't mean you aren't qualified to do it. It means that you just need to learn how. That there are things you can do to be able to work with other people, and sometimes there are challenges, and sometimes there are issues, and not every collaboration will be perfectly successful, but there are a lot of things you can do to make them more successful, and we're going to be talking about that throughout the quarter. This is the thing where it's sort of, I said, we're going to focus mostly on the practical stuff. At the same time, we are really going to at least gain some familiarity with where that cutting edge is, what kinds of things you're likely to run into in the future, or where the field is going. There is kind of a career development piece of this, and in particular, we're going to be talking about what does it mean to be a UX professional. So what does that job look like? Thinking about the kinds of things you would do. The goal and the structure of this class is set up so that at the end of it you will have a portfolio-ready example of UX work that you have done that demonstrates the range of your knowledge. Partly I say that now because I want you, as you do all of your assignments, they are cumulative. The work that you are doing in your first assignment becomes part of your last assignment. And so be thinking about, is this something that's going to be good enough that you want to include it in your portfolio? Because it's not just me you are thinking about pleasing here, it may be your future employers. And then also getting to better know each other and think about, I look back on the people I was in school with and the things, and they're still part of my network and still helping me with this. And so I think starting that now and thinking about learning about who each other are and what kind of strengths you have, what your different career paths might be, is going to be useful. And finally, have fun. So hopefully we'll do that too. Any questions about these? Anything you're surprised that's in there that you thought maybe should be in there that you feel is missing, that wasn't clear? Okay. All right, so how is this going to work? So the biggest thing is that you are going to have a project. It is one project for 10 weeks. And what I want to do now is give you kind of a high-level overview of what this class is going to be through that project. Did I mention? Maybe I will mention. There are basically 3 components to the course. One of them is your group work. That will be about 50% of your grade. The other 50% will be made up of individual assignments and engagement and attendance. And I'll talk about that more in a little bit. So how does this project work? It is essentially a scenario-based project. This is not like some other project courses that are in informatics where you actually have a real client. Here you have a fictional client with a real product. And so the idea behind this, and this is a very common actually way of thinking about this, or what happens is that you and your team have been hired to conduct a 10-week UX investigation, evaluation, and redesign of an interactive computer-based system, and to produce a report documenting your work and findings. That is going to take you 10 weeks and could probably take you much more than that. It's a big project, it turns out, but we hope that the structure that we've got for it is going to help you get through. It has so far in every other class. I haven't had anyone who wasn't able to finish. You will work in a team of ideally 5 people. I really want it to be 5 people. That's a good number for this project. It makes everything easier. If there are odd numbers or we need to work around the edges, we could have a few 4s. I want to avoid 6s. You will be working with the same team for the entire quarter. All team members must also be in the same discussion section because you will be doing a lot of project work in your discussion sections. Yeah.
Last quarter we kind of like shuffled around discussions.
Not happening again.
Okay.
No, never again. Never again.
That was also my first question for him because I just don't want to deal with it again.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there will be no shuffling. All right. So, what is the system you will be evaluating? You get to choose the system. There are some constraints on that choice. It must be a deployed system that you can access, which means it has to be something that is actually out there in the world that you are going to be able to get full access to. There are some possibilities where if it's a freemium kind of project, say something like, where it's got a free version and then a paid version, sometimes the free version might be enough for you to work with. We'll have to discuss that if that situation comes up. You also may not choose a system that you have personally worked on, either deployed or already studied. They cannot be student systems. They can't be things that you've all done for another course. These need to be kind of professional level systems. We'll talk more about how to choose this on Thursday. There are a few little things to think about. So I'm sure that about 75% of you immediately thought Spotify or something like that. I'm going to advise against those kinds of things, and here's why. And I have had people do Spotify and just also a little piece of this. Often the teams that choose something that is like a really popular, high-end, could be Facebook, could be whatever, they often do the worst in the class because there's so little for them to work with, and the systems are so complex. Spotify has a fleet of HCI professionals who've been working on this thing for years and years and years, and while there are problems, and it's easy to find those problems, when it comes to the part at the end where you have to then suggest a design solution, one of the things you're likely to find is that, yeah, there are problems, but they probably got the best way of doing it already. And there may not be a better solution. And so that can become a real problem when you're trying to write up the end of your report. The things that work best in this area are products for small companies or where the system may not actually be their primary service. So for example, if there's a mid-sized company that has an online portal for maybe they're a retail outlet, something like that, could be other kinds of service things. Those end up being quite a bit easier to work with. You need to, there's kind of a balance, and we'll talk about this and go through a couple of iterations and thinking about this, but a balance between robust enough that there's something for you to work with, but not so good that all the problems have essentially already been fixed or are too big for us to deal with in this course. The other thing I'll caution you against is anything that has personalization as a primary component. Because one of the things that can do is that if it's too personalized, it can make it actually hard to do your user testing because the system looks different for every single person. And if, they say, because one of the things we'll be doing is usability lab tests, you're going to want people to actually use the system. If you don't have something that's already personalized to them and they're just getting random recommendations, it can throw off some of your results. It's not impossible to work with that, but again, it's just something to watch out for, and we'll talk more about this as we get into it. So, when we say I've been talking about doing a redesign, one of the things that you're going to be doing is proposing a new design or design changes to your system. You will produce medium to high fidelity mock-ups of your system, of the interfaces, but you will not be coding anything. You are not actually producing working systems. You, as part of your report, you are recommending back to the company what they could do differently. And so your goal is to provide something that is enough for them to work with, and maybe they could start coding off of it, but is not actually code. So don't worry if you aren't a coder. There is no coding required in this class. Yeah. Sorry? So we'll talk about tools later on. It'll kind of be up to you to choose what kind of tools you want to use. You can, for some of the assignments, and as you get into the main project assignment, using software to do your high fidelity work is going to be okay, but we're actually also going to be doing quite a bit of work on pen and paper. And we're going to be starting there most of the time. So how is this going to work? You're going to have 5 separate group assignments, each of which will be a section of your final report. So the last assignment is the final report. So let me tell you how this works. Assignment number 1 is that you are going to need to produce essentially a proposal. So this would be the kind of thing that if you were actually being hired and somebody put out a request for proposals, you would say, this is what we think we're going to do. And this is how we're going to do it. It's a little bit more detailed because there's also, for me, that goal of making sure you understand group work. So part of what you're going to be doing is creating a collaboration document, a collaboration plan for your group. You will then be describing the system that you are working with. And then you will actually be also doing, as part of that first assignment, a competitive analysis. So how does it compare to other things that are available that fit that same user group or the same kind of tasks? Again, we'll get into all of this a little bit more later. Your second assignment is focused on user research. You will be doing interviews and surveys. Every one of you will be required to go talk to other people about their work, or about to interview other people. So you're all going to be having experience with that. And then how to analyze that data and, again, produce a report that says, here's what we have found. Third assignment is doing essential user experience testing and evaluation, where you take the existing system and you will do 2 different evaluations of it. One of those evaluations has to be the equivalent of a usability lab test, where you're going to actually watch people using the software with structured tasks. The other one is somewhat up to you with some guidance from us. What you can do, you could do a cognitive walkthrough, or you could maybe do, if it's a deployed system and you can get other data, there are other kinds of things you could do with it. The fourth assignment is your redesign assignment. So based on the problems that you find based on what you know about the users from the second assignment, what you know about the competition from the first assignment, and what you know about the problems from your third assignment, you will then propose solutions. You will actually you will do sketching, and then you will actually create some mock-ups of changes that you would like to see and you would suggest for this product. The last assignment, assignment 5, is the one place where we really do get some iteration, because what you will be doing as part of your last assignment is evaluating your own redesign. You're going to be doing a heuristic evaluation of the thing that you proposed, of your own mock-ups, and then you will be putting that, along with all of the other pieces, stitching them all together into a final report. And that's assignment 5. So that's the structure of this. This is modeled, and I've talked to people. I have a friend who works right now at Motorola in user experience. And I describe, he's like, that's what we do. That's our process. And so this really is modeled on the kind of work that a UX professional will do, with the goal of really getting you hands-on experience throughout the quarter. You're also going to be presenting your work in class quite a bit. I'll talk in a few minutes about how this class is going to be structured. All right, questions about the project for now? Yeah, Zach.
Should we be able to maybe talk to the people who own the company? Should it try to be Irvine-based, Southern California-based, or do we just need to be able to use the software?
You don't need to interact with the company at all. If you want to, you can. I mean, if it happens to be somebody local or whatever. If it is somebody, I actually also always encourage groups to send their final report to the company. It's an interesting kind of experience to do that. And sometimes you'll hear back, and sometimes they may actually want to know you better. But one of the things that I will say is that if you do that, again, this is because we need to do a lot in so little time. You won't have a chance to really respond to their needs or their questions. So if you want to go out and you want to say, hey, why did you do this, or interview them and say, can you tell me about it, that's great. If what you're looking for is a client, that's a problematic relationship here, because you can't necessarily say, oh, they're really interested in this and not so much in that, so we're going to do this and not that. That's not possible here. You sort of have to follow this process for this particular report. So in a lot of ways, Hillary and I are your clients.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the user experience for social good component of this lecture. Now, the reason that I'm including UX for social good in this class is because I am creating a variation on the group project that you're engaging in for this class. Specifically, the system that you choose for your project must support social good. The reason I've decided to include social good as a condition for this project is because it is one of my teaching goals to support diversity, inclusion, and general human rights. And so by encouraging the class to engage in this context, I hope that we can create some really interesting discussions about the grand scheme of the purpose of our work as UX designers. There are some disciplines that focus directly on helping people, such as firefighters or doctors or social workers, for example. There are other disciplines that have the potential to indirectly help people, and user experience design is one of those. To support social good and user experience design, we must learn to practice empathy for the users and for the other entities in the use context of the information systems and user experiences we are designing. There are a number of fields under the user experience for social good umbrella, including accessible computing, which focuses on people with disabilities, child-computer interaction, computing and education, health and wellness, information for marginalized and vulnerable people, such as perhaps prisoners, information or data visualization for individuals and society, personal information management, the security and safety of our information, sustainability and design, and then finally value-sensitive design. And part of achieving this empathy for people in the context in the user experience context is understanding the human values. Balker and Starr stated, we need to recognize that all information systems are necessarily suffused with ethics and political values modulated by local administrative procedures. And the reason that we need to recognize that is because we as the designers are imbuing technologies, all the technologies that we design and the user experiences that we design with our own values and social agendas, even if we're doing it unintentionally. Now that gives us an advantage because if we practice empathy, we can work on molding the values that we imbue in the technologies and the user experiences we design to support social good. Here are several examples of user experience for social good, and these could be potential projects. We have microfinancing, which provides members of poorer communities with loans without collecting collateral first. We have crowdfunding, which can, for example, support a family who's trying to raise money for a medical operation that they cannot otherwise pay for. And then friends and families and strangers can help fund their medical procedure. There are just general donations and charities, such as this freerice.com, where if you engage in vocabulary exercises and you get them right, you donate rice, and you can do this. So basically by studying for the SAT or the GRE, you can donate rice. We have public data services that lots of professions use, such in this case, this is like a species selector tool, and lots of farmers across the country use it. We have Nature Conservancy. In this case, we have a database of birds built by Cornell. There's also a citizen science component to that, as well as a huge number of citizen science initiatives here on this site of citizenscience.gov. And then, of course, we have public health, and in this case, we have the Medi-Cal website, which supports many people, probably people you know, with health insurance. Okay, so moving on, we have the expectations of the course. So first, you are expected to attend every single class, including the class this Thursday, and you are expected to attend every discussion. There will be activities in class, and if you miss those activities, you will not be able to make them up. We expect you to come to class prepared, so that means that you are expected to do all of the content on Canvas before coming to class, and there will be exercises that are due after a class, but there's almost always content that you're expected to read or watch before class as well. We expect you to particularly engage with your groups in and outside of the classroom, so there needs to be an open line of communication. We expect you to treat your team members with respect and aim to work well with them and to have productive meetings and support one another. And finally, we expect for you to communicate with us, your instructors, your teaching staff. We are available for questions after class or discussion, and we are always available by email. So please contact us with your problems or questions earlier than later, so that way we can address any kind of issues that arise in a timely fashion. So every class you will need to bring a computer that has internet connectivity so you can engage on Canvas. You will require blank paper and writing utensils. I suggest bringing maybe a couple of different writing utensils because at points in the class we will be engaging in drawing exercises. Okay, so now I would like to conclude this lecture, and I'd like to ask all of you to move on to Canvas and form your teams. Please form your teams before Thursday's class. And remember, I will not be there, but TA Mark will be there, and he will lead you through your first activity that will prepare you for your first team project, the first part of your team project.